Welcome back to Dealbook. It is a privilege to be with all of you, and we have a very, very special conversation planned for right now. We want this to be as interactive as possible, and I hope you'll all join us in the comments asking questions, which we can bring to our guests, and also planning to ask you a couple of questions. We're going to take advantage of some of the polling technology this afternoon. As I said, this is a conversation I've been looking forward to all day and for many weeks now. We are joined by Bill Gates, somebody who needs no introduction. I've had the privilege to know Bill for quite some time and to talk to him throughout this pandemic, and he is far and away the smartest person I know about really helping us set the table to understand where we are. I've called him a national treasure, but he is now a global treasure. He's donated more than $400 million to COVID research. He also called this, I hate to say it, in advance back in 2015 when he warned about a possible pandemic of this sort. I should also note he's trying to get into the journalism business. He started a podcast this week, which you can go out and get as well. I should also introduce Albert Bourla. Albert may no longer need an introduction either. He is the CEO of Pfizer, and he has done something quite remarkable with this COVID vaccine, and the trial results that we have seen have been just astonishing, and we're going to talk to him about what that all means and where it is all headed. And then we have Heidi Larson, who runs the Vaccine Confidence Project, one of the most important efforts that I know about to get people to ultimately take a vaccine. And that, as we've talked about with Dr. Fauci, is such an important element of how we're going to get out of this pandemic. And so let me start with Bill. Bill, you and I have had a lot of conversations during this pandemic, and you've always been able to level set me in a very truthful way about where we are. We spent some time with Dr. Fauci, who you know very, very well and who was on your podcast. We talked to him just about a little over an hour ago. And he said something that surprised me. He said that for us to get back to a no mask wearing, no social distance world, that he imagined that the vaccination uptake, meaning the percentage of people that would have to take it, would have to be north of 75%. And as I thought about that in the United States, I'm thinking that's 250 million some odd people. These vaccines appear that and Albert will talk about it, have to be taken twice with a booster. That's 500 million visits to a doctor. How confident, and we'll talk to Heidi about confidence, but how confident are you that a year from now, if we were having this conversation, hopefully in person, that we will get there?
Well, we're likely to be supply constrained on the vaccine for the next year, particularly if you look on a global basis. With the very good news from Pfizer and Moderna, we think it's now likely that AstraZeneca, Novavax, and Johnson & Johnson will also likely show very strong efficacy. And those three vaccines are a little bit easier to scale up to production at very low marginal cost and don't have the same temperature requirements. So for the developing world, the second source agreements we have with Indian manufacturers to make those three vaccines may be part of getting the supply equation solved. It's fair to say that now that the supply is starting to emerge, this issue of the demand side, may be something important. I'm a little surprised we don't have a website from the CDC where people are registering their interest in taking the vaccine, where we can coordinate things. And of course, we need some sort of digital certificate because we're likely to say to people working in nursing homes or hospitals or maybe even schools that they need to authenticate that they've been vaccinated, and even travel will have some of that. So it's exciting that Pfizer did a great job, broke every record. But now this distribution challenge, including getting for the world, over 10 billion doses, it's very daunting.
Were you surprised when you heard the results?
I was very happy because we've been tracking, one of our top vaccine people, Emilio Emini, who was at Pfizer most of his career. We've been tracking the antibody results. And the Pfizer had good results, but so did a lot of the other vaccines. We just didn't know what the response would be. And the fact that that's protective makes us think the other vaccines will be as well. So it was very well done to get it done as quickly. It was at the high end of what people expected. You know, the biology is not totally predictable, but there's a lot of heroes, including the willingness to team up with this BioNTech and bring the strengths of Pfizer and the mRNA work BioNTech had done. It's incredible. The whole mRNA story is a great story. And, you know, in the years ahead, we'll figure out how to avoid the cold chain and get the manufacturing cost and scalability. You know, this platform will be valuable for far more than just COVID elimination.
Hey, Albert, first of all, it's great to see you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. The entire country, when this gets out to people, owes you a debt of gratitude. But help us understand this, because I think there's still so many questions about this vaccine. You hear these 90+% numbers, the Moderna number at 94%, but people still don't know how long the vaccine will last. There are questions about the age with which and severity, illness severity. Can you speak to some of the big questions that you think are still unanswered?
Yes, there are many questions unanswered, but the fundamental questions about do we have a vaccine, now two with Moderna, that have outstanding efficacy have been answered. I think the questions about safety at large also have been answered. Our safety milestone has been achieved already, and we are preparing now for submissions. And when it comes to how durable the protection will be, this is something that we don't know yet. And this is why we are following our subjects in the study, the 44,000, for at least 2 years, so that we will see if there is a feint in the durability or not. The good news is that if there is one with the mRNA technology, you can boost as soon as you want. And in this case, you don't need 2 doses. Likely one will be needed, which means that if it's an annual, people will have to do 1 dose the next year and then 1 dose the year after. But we don't know. We may find that the immunity is quite durable right now.
Albert, I was just going to ask, how concerned are you that people will take 1 dose and won't go back for the second dose?
I think that will be a big mistake, but this is this happens, and in several cases. Usually, with our vaccines, we have quite good level of compliance, but we hope that all will be responsible to that, and they will take their 2 doses.
Albert, I should tell you, before we did this, we got so many questions directly for you because people just want to know about the drug unto itself. So I just want to ask you almost rapid fire a couple quick ones. This is in part because Moderna gave some more details than you did, but maybe you can say this. Of the 94 cases of COVID-positive clinical trial participants, exactly how many in the placebo and how many were in the vaccine group? And can you say whether they had severe illness or not?
Yes. The reason why we didn't give the exact number and we just said more than 90% was because at the end, when the study concludes, there is always the chance that we'll go 1 point up, 1 point down. So if it was 95, it could be 96 or 94. And I didn't want to confuse people. So given that we are very, very close to announce our final results, I would wait to announce the final results, and all this information will be there.
Okay, I have one more before I get to Heidi, but it goes to this issue of confidence, actually, in the country right now about all of this, and frankly, how politicized, Albert, you know that COVID has become. Since the announcement, as you know, the president has accused Pfizer basically of conspiring with the FDA so that the vaccine news would come out after the election. That's the allegation. Speak to it, if you could, as directly as you can.
Oh, I will be very direct. We didn't conspire with anyone, of course, and the elections was always for us an artificial deadline. It may have been very important for the president, but not for us. And this is why I issued immediately after the first presidential debate a letter to our employees that was published. And I was saying that some want us to move faster, some want us to move slower. what I'm telling you, it is that we are going to move with the speed of science, which is exactly what we did. I had predicted that we will have efficacy results by the end of October, and many people told me that's too soon and complained. Then I announced it a few days later, in the first week of November, and many people told me that was too late. What to do? This is what science does. We had to follow. The first consideration in my mind was to follow all the process scientifically and ethically. So once we have the results, will be undisputable. And this is what we did.
Did you ever get a call from anybody in the White House administration saying you need to come forward with this before November 3rd?
No, I knew very well, because I had spoken to the president, that he would like to see it earlier, but I didn't receive any pressure per se on me to do something that it is not appropriate. And I think everybody knew better not to ask me something like that, because I would never do something like that.
Heidi, I want to bring you into this conversation and really get at this issue of confidence. And the first question that I asked Bill about, which is, if we really do have to get to a 75% uptake of taking this vaccine, putting aside the supply constraint, and let's just talk about the demand, what do you think the world looks like right now? I mean, would you anticipate we could get to 75%? What number would you project, and what would you do about it?
Well, there's always a chance. We're not there yet in terms of the public intent based on a lot of the global surveys. That's, a bit below that. It's more 50-60, depends on the countries. It's actually quite variable across countries, but that's only intention. And so I think sometimes there has been too much disappointment and prediction that it's going to be bad, because people don't know. We have to appreciate that it's been a hyper uncertain time. So I don't think we should say we're never going to get there just because the surveys look at political opinion polling. I mean, people are guessing. I think this week, will change the landscape, because the hope behind it, I think this has been a huge vote of confidence, in a sense. People judge, they want to know if it works. That's a big thing. They want to know if it's safe. And then they want to know, who's going to get it first. And I think this week has shifted. I mean, we're about to rerun a lot of surveys, because this will change. This will change how people think. So I think there is hope. It won't be everywhere. And we have a lot of work to do, and we need to start building the awareness of the options and what it's going to take sooner rather than later. Don't wait for the vaccine to be at the clinic before.
Hey, Bill, could you speak to this? Before we had this session, we publicized that we were going to have this conversation, and I got, a torrent, as I imagine you may, of tweets and other emails and social media from people who, I'm afraid to say, clearly don't like you, and seem to suggest that this vaccine is somehow being not only funded by you, but some kind of effort to track you or track people. How concerned are you about this? What do you think of this? I mean, when you go home and talk to Melinda and see this stuff online, what's the conversation like?
Well, up until the pandemic, our work on infectious disease was reasonably obscure, because malaria is gone from the rich countries, TB is very limited, even HIV's largely contained. And so the world of people who think about vaccines and new vaccine platforms and how we do all these things, it's a very important group of people who've done amazing work bringing childhood deaths down. We have lots of new vaccines, some of which we're working with Pfizer to get out for more of these childhood diseases. And so it turned out that, our team of vaccine experts was outside the private sector, one of the largest groups. And so the idea of, okay, how do we get these second source agreements with the Indian manufacturers? We were able to bring a lot to that, including some of our resources. The fact that I said this was a concern, I wasn't the only one. Health experts have been saying that for a long time. It was unusual to have, a software person saying, okay, this is the biggest threat for all these deaths. So I'm surprised at the conspiracy theories. I think I'm supposed to, make it clear they're not true. But, where does that come from? Is it because these are uncertain times? People prefer a simpler story than the biological zoonosis that took place. I hope it fades away because we're just trying to play a constructive role where a lot of these tools, whether it's antibodies or vaccines, you don't just want to use market-based pricing.
Right.
You want all of humanity collaborating together, and we're helping to facilitate that.
Well, let me just follow up, though, and ask you this. And it was something we talked to Dr. Anthony Fauci about as well. There seems to be a behavioral science question going on in this country about people who decide to wear masks, to not wear masks, maybe to get the vaccine, to not get the vaccine. Dr. Fauci has probably done 2,000 interviews where he has told the public as emphatically as he can about the science. And yet there are people that, for reasons that may be inexplicable, but maybe you have an answer, either don't understand, don't want to believe it, or actively are trying to do something to make it not the case. How do you think about that?
Well, the idea that there's some people who think anything, it's okay. There's going to be fringe groups. The fact that in the United States that the mask wearing skepticism or view that that's a political act, the U.S. is worse than other countries. And is that because of our current leadership? Is it because of our individualistic view of things? I think that's hard to attribute. I wouldn't have expected mask wearing to become controversial. I wouldn't have expected the administration to find sort of the wildest fringe opinion possible and put that opinion as the leader of the coronavirus task force. So this thing is full of surprises, but people do want to protect themselves. They do want to protect their parents and grandparents. I hope we're surprised on the upside by the demand for the vaccine.
Right. Albert, Bill just mentioned the president, the current administration. One of the big questions is the next administration in this transition period. It sounds like Dr. Fauci and others have not had an opportunity to talk to the Biden transition team, but you may have. Have you had a conversation with them yet?
I haven't spoken to the vice president and president-elect now, Biden, myself. But our team, throughout the process, kept informed both the White House and the Biden campaign in all the developments of our vaccine. And the same happened with the leadership of the Congress. We kept informed, myself personally as well, the leaders from the Democratic and the leaders from the Republican part. So they were all very well informed, and we keep doing that after now that the vaccine data are out.
Are you concerned about this transition period? I know there are lots of challenges about just distributing this drug to begin with, let alone having to deal with two different administrations in the middle of it.
Yeah, I don't think it's ideally that we are starting likely in the middle of a transition. It's always better when there is clear accountability and leadership, but I think that that will not become a problem. I think, as Bill said, for me, the biggest challenge will be that in the beginning, the dose availability will be smaller than the demand. I have zero concerns about, for example, the cold chain that we have to implement. I know there was a lot of things that were written. We are feeling very, very confident that we will send it to everywhere.
Well,
at least in.
Help explain that to the public, just so everybody understands what's happening here, because your vaccine does need to stay at a very cold temperature, and therefore you're going to be sending it out in custom-made boxes. My understanding is effectively with dry ice in them. How is that going to work, and what does that do to the pricing of the drug?
Our engineers have developed these boxes, actually, and they did that months back. And those boxes are isothermic boxes that they have a GPS, and they have also a thermometer inside. So we know at any point where the box is and what is the temperature. So if something goes wrong, which we don't anticipate, we will not use the vaccine. Every box is, a small box like that. and can take 1,000 to 5,000 doses. And when we ship it, we don't need to use refrigeration. So we can ship it in normal cars, trucks, airplanes, boats, whatever. In the US, we will ship in most of the places overnight. So once we receive an address from the government, the next day the product will be there. And once people receive it, they can keep it for weeks in the box, or they can keep it for months in super freezers, or they can put it in refrigeration and keep it for a week approximately. I think that the demand will be so big that it is going to be distributed, not distributed, but injected in hours rather than days or weeks. So we feel very confident about it.
Let me just ask you, talking about the demand issue and just how much is going to be needed, your company made a particular point of saying that you weren't part of the Operation Warp Speed program, though the government, of course, did commit to buy close to $2 billion worth of the vaccine. In retrospect, now that we know how successful these tests and efficacy seem to be, do you think you should have participated and let them effectively defray some of the costs so you could have ramped up even more?
I think it's irrelevant. I think the reason why, first of all, let me be clear, it's not that we are not part of the Operation Warp Speed, because we are discussing with them and to collaborate in every form that we can find it useful. We didn't take a single cent from anybody. And as a result, we didn't follow any recommendations in protocols. We didn't have to report. It's all developed in-house by our scientists. And that's the reason why I did it. The reason why I did it is because I wanted to liberate our scientists from the bureaucracy that comes together when you are accepting money from a governmental organization. We didn't take money from any of them. I think, and also I wanted to keep Pfizer out of politics. Because imagine, and you see, even without taking the money, you see what happened with our vaccine, because we are a company that has high profile. That's very, very, very well known. Now, okay, we maybe we could have, this whole thing will cost us $2 billion. If we were unsuccessful, we had to write off $2 billion. This is painful for any corporation, but was not going to break us. So we could continue. On the contrary, if we were successful, the fact that we were independent and we didn't, and we protected ourselves from politics could have been not only a good service to us, but also to public health. Right. And so I don't regret a single moment that I didn't do it. And I wouldn't regret it even if we had failed.
Fair enough. Bill, I wanted to go back to you about something that you've been saying for months, which is the issue of testing and what a mess, frankly, testing has been in the United States. I talked to Dr. Fauci about this earlier, but are you of the view that we should be doing and investing in massive, effectively surveillance testing in the United States? And is that a worthy investment at this point, given what we hope is going to be coming quite soon in the form of the vaccines from people like Albert?
Well, even if we get reasonable coverage, say 8 or 9 months from now, there's a lot of lives still to be saved between now and then. Over 250,000 lives are potentially at risk in terms of both our behavior and using the testing data to quarantine. And so whether it's schools or nursing homes, yes, the continued scale up of the tests, getting the results back quicker. And now there's this very complicated thing of understanding where these so-called lateral flow antigen tests, where those are appropriate, where they're not. Because that's the main thing that's upping the numbers. Otherwise, there's a gradual increase. There may be a few breakthroughs in January and February that get out in time. We've got the self-test idea, which is a thing that our foundation proved out that can help a lot. So testing is still very important, and likewise, getting these monoclonal antibodies out as a therapeutic, which you need to give the patient fairly early, that's also super important. If we'd had one wish, it would have been the vaccine, but we also still have wishes about getting those antibodies to reduce deaths, which could be up to 80%, and reducing the infection rate in the 8 to 9 months before we get widespread dosage, even in the United States.
Do you think we should test, by the way, for antibodies before distributing the vaccine, given what may be the limited supply that we have?
No, that's it. The antibody tests are limited enough, and so-called natural infection is probably not as protective as vaccine infection. Vaccine is a very unnatural stimulation to a particular set of antigens, and so no, we should give the vaccine to everybody, independent of whether they feel they were infected beforehand.
Hey, Albert, can you weigh in on that issue as well, given the demand issue? I've seen people suggest that as a way to deal with how to approach the distribution.
I believe that the health authorities who are responsible and accountable for every country and every state, they should design special programs, how they can use the available doses to them strategically. I agree with Bill, but it's not me to make this decision. I would have started giving it to more vulnerable populations and first-line responders. But again, as I said, the plan should be tailored to every state, and the state's governors should make them in collaboration with CDC and Operation Warp Speed.
I want to ask you one other, or actually want to ask you two other questions before we pivot off of the vaccine question, Albert, because I know you're going to jump off in just a moment. One is, and Bill alluded to this, mRNA. When you look into the future of what these results represent, what do you think the greatest opportunity is here?
Look, I mean, this is the first, I think, confirmation, and it is a glorious confirmation of the power of the technology. And I believe that the technology has a lot to offer in the vaccines, for example, in other viral infections, but also I believe in other medical applications against cancer, for example. And I'm very optimistic that pretty soon we will start seeing a lot of follow-up innovations that are built on the base of a successfully proven mRNA technology.
And Albert, before you jump off, let me ask you one other question, because it's been in the headlines, and I have to ask it to you. And as happy as we are about the vaccine, there have been questions raised about some of the stock sales that executives at Pfizer, including yourself, were engaged in last week as part of this pre-planned 10b-5. And I appreciate and understand that you had put that in place last winter, but you reaffirmed it in August. And I wanted to ask, given that we're having a conversation about confidence and credibility in the system and in these things, whether you think it was a mistake not to have ended that program, given the conversation and questions that are being asked now.
Yes, thank you. No, I understand, because this comes with the territory. And if suddenly your company and yourself as a leader is in the spotlight, always there will be things that will be criticized. I'm working 27 years with Pfizer, and something that you don't know is that this is the first time that I ever sold any Pfizer shares. So for 27 years, I accumulate only. And I have set this plan in February of 2020, and I set the price and I set the volume that I wanted to, first time in my life, buy shares and sell shares. And I renewed the plan with the exact same conditions, price and volumes, when the plan was close to its expiration, and I renewed it for 1 year. In fact, on Monday, I didn't know that I sold the shares, because I didn't sell. It's an administrator, but it's selling automatically. And I never saw the stock price going above, when I monitor the price that I was asking apparently went, and I couldn't see it in the diagram. And that was sold. I regret, because for me, it's the first time that I becoming so famous, and from a hero to why you sold in 1 day. And, it was, I was very happy. Then I was devastated when I saw what was written. Yeah, I wish I didn't have to deal with that. But as I said, it's coming. So, it comes with the territory.
So 2 quick follow-ups. Will you change the program going forward?
Says what?
Will you change the program going forward? Meaning, are you going to end the program?
I don't have any other program right now.
It's done.
I had one in my thoughts. That was the first I ever did in my life. And that's the first time that they ever sold any shares, as I said. And that's what they were sold automatically.
Let me just ask one final question, which is, as you know so very well, the pharma industry has long been considered a villain, oftentimes in Washington and in the public sphere. Do you think that this is going to fundamentally change the success of, hopefully, this vaccine and what the industry has done is going to fundamentally change the perception of the people and the industry that you work in?
I hope so, and I think that this represents a unique opportunity to reset the value proposition that this industry is having in the perception of people to society. But I wouldn't, let's say, declare any victory. I think there are many more things that we need to do because reputation is lost in buckets, but you earn it back in drops. So I hope that we will continue doing the miracles that we do, and I hope that people will see it a little bit less suspicious rather than in conspiracy theories. We discussed that before with Bill. And this biopharmaceutical industry, which, by the way, in this country is the crown jewel of technology, will get the recognition and reputation that it deserves. There is no other industry in my life, in my opinion, there is no other industry that produces so much good to humanity than in this industry.
Albert, I want to thank you. Appreciate it very, very much. I know you're going to jump off, but we're going to stick with Bill and we're going to stick with Heidi. And I wanted to ask Heidi, if I could, a little bit about some of the projects that you're working on to try to get people to take the vaccine. And the reason I ask about this again, but in particular, some of the very, very specific efforts that you're engaged in to try to get this done on a grassroots level, because one of the things you and I have been talking about is this idea that it's not necessarily going to come from the President of the United States. It may come from a pastor. It may come from your local doctor. It may come from people that live in your community. And what you think has to be done to accomplish that, especially in places where there seems to be so much resistance?
Well, I think actually, Bill would know this, that we learned a lot with the polio eradication initiative about getting as local as you can and really getting into and listening. In some cases, it's the religious leader. Somewhere else, it might be the teacher. Somewhere else, it's, and I think when the top is distrusted, and is not giving, I mean, even when there is clarity at the top, you still want to build that community momentum. And the reality is there's a lot of the distrust, and the people who are believing more and are more anxious are in communities which are not going to follow national guidance. They're not going to be following WHO guidance. They want to hear it from their neighbor.
How critical, and Bill had alluded to this, there are certain jobs that people have where it's required that you take the vaccine. Do you think, Heidi, that employers, especially in places like the United States, should require it? And will that create more compliance, or do you think that creates a bigger backlash?
Well, I think compulsion in general, particularly in this current environment, is there's not a lot of appetite for more compulsion. I think there's a lot of resistance to the idea of control in general. But there are a lot of precedents for, as Bill had mentioned earlier, getting certificates for certain things, whether it's to work in hospitals, to go to schools. So it's much more setting-based than a government requiring it more broadly. It's so you don't spread to other people the virus. So it's feasible, but I don't think we're there yet, because also we don't have enough supply to be making. You need to be ready to deliver when you demand something. You need to have the supply. There's not enough supply to be requiring everyone to take it yet.
Bill, before we continue the rest of the conversation, I want to talk to you about therapeutics and just society at large and what you think is going to be happening over this next period. But we have the polling function here, Bill, where the tens of thousands of people, if not more than that now, it looks like, who are joining us, have the ability to answer a poll. So I want to ask a question based a little bit on the conversation we just had, which is, if the FDA approved a Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, would you take it? But here's the question. Would you take it in the first month? So we're going to ask everybody to try to answer that as we continue our conversation. And hopefully at the end of the conversation, Bill will come back and talk about the results. But, we've talked a lot about the vaccine, Bill, but let's talk about the importance of therapeutics and what you actually see on the horizon. What are the most interesting ones out there, and how important that may ultimately be to all of this in terms of giving people confidence that if they do get it, if they are the part of the 10% perhaps that somehow still has the vaccine and gets it, that they're going to be okay?
Well, the therapeutics area has been a disappointment. We can divide therapeutics into the early stage that mostly moderate the viral peak, or late stage that mostly moderate the immune overreaction. And there was a trial partly funded by the foundation in the UK early on that showed dexamethasone in that late stage had a over 30% benefit. The early stage, only remdesivir shown anything, and even there was not a death reduction. So we're surprised we haven't had more. The one thing in that category that is actually very exciting is the monoclonal antibody. And Eli Lilly got their emergency use authorization for a 0.7 gram infusion of their single antibody just a week ago. Now we're working with them to change that so to see if if you can avoid the infusion and just go with a what's called a sub-Q shot of 0.3 grams, which would make scaling it up a lot easier because infusion is a bit difficult. We don't have, even in the US, a lot of spare capacity for that. So I'm fairly hopeful about that. We made a bet back in the spring to reserve a factory to make this antibody so that we'd have the capacity to get it out to lots of countries. And, in the next month, we'll see, is this simple formulation at 0.3 grams, does that work as well as the 0.7 grams that got approved?
Now, this may sound counterintuitive, but if you're successful, does it mean less people will take the vaccine? Meaning if people think that they can walk into a CVS and take a different drug, is that going to change the dynamic?
If the antibody was like 95 or 100% effective, then yes, but it won't be. It'll be more like 70 to 80% effective. And so, no, I think people will know not to roll the dice and let themselves get infected and hope that the antibody will save them. With HIV, the medicines are so effective that we do have this disinhibition challenge with that, but I don't think that we would see that in this case.
I was going to go to Bill on this, but we should actually probably start with Heidi on this. I just want to understand social media. Bill is on social media, but Bill is a technologist. But Heidi, you've been dealing with misinformation on social media as part of this whole situation. And I wonder what you think the social media companies, and I should tell you that Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey are testifying today virtually in Washington, what you think they should do differently.
Well, I think they have an absolutely key role in reining in the amplification of these particularly the very damaging and harmful misinformation that's out there. I think it's a challenging thing in terms of not everything is so straightforward, like drinking chlorine to cure you. I mean, that is explicitly harmful, and they can take that down. But there's a lot of very ambiguous questioning that is much more difficult from a freedom of speech point of view, as well as ethically, to take down. But what they can do is clip it off at the back end, not so to speak. It's really what's different between now and these anti-vaccine leagues in the 1800s is the rate and the speed and the amplification beyond what anyone who puts out there actually it really right. even realizes. So I think that's where there's a critical role. Because what we see, even with the political, the cards and the flagging of misinformation in the campaign, what happens is when the anti groups and the ones propagating the misinformation see that one of these companies is restricting what's on the face and they just move. There's plenty of alternatives these days, plenty of other places too. So I think we have to be strategic or encourage them. Let's see what they have to say about that. But that's what I would.
Bill, where do you land? Are they a platform that should have free and unfettered free speech, or are they a media company?
The number of messages that are originated on those services is gigantic. And some of them are more, the nature of posting to a very small group of people you know well. Others are more like publishing, where you have a large group that includes many strangers. And, asking them to be the arbiter of all these things is pretty tough. Now, the extreme stuff like QAnon or certain of the conspiracy theories, they have been more active in the last few months, particularly about medical misinformation. They've been better about that. Some election misinformation too. Hopefully we're past most of that. But I think they have a very tough job. They should see things that are catching on in kind of a exponential way, and those they should pay particular attention to, including, I think, this tactic now of being able to mark stuff and say, okay, you should read that, this is believed to be false. I think we're, sort of finding our way, which won't be either leave it alone all the time or strict liability, which, if you got strict liability, it's not clear that they could even stay in business.
Do you think, though, one of the things that's fascinating is the rise, for example, of Parler. Even over the last several weeks, the number of high-profile people who have jumped on to that bandwagon. And so even if you had some companies voluntarily try to manage this, you have others who may approach it in a very different way. You've lived with the regulatory beast in Washington before, Bill, but do you think ultimately regulation is required?
There will be regulation. And, at least when somebody goes to Parler, they're saying, I like crazy stuff. I'm over here. So you're not taking a mainstream thing that's part of how a family stays in touch and is used for a variety of things. You're literally going over to, hey, what's the craziest thing that anybody's saying? And so it's a choice you're making, and if you want Holocaust denial, hey, Parler's going to be great for you. But it's where this, Facebook services are the primary way people access news, and they get drawn in to more and more extreme stories, including some of these anti-vaccine or conspiracy things. And so it's, that person who hasn't started out saying, I want crazy stuff, they get drawn down and see things that are very titillating. And that is where, it's almost a human weakness. And so deciding how much we should make that less common, it's tough. The anti-vaccine movement has always been there. Fortunately, it's mostly been on the fringes. And, now's when we need a lot of people to understand about the safety protocols, and somewhere in their trust hierarchy to have somebody who can, talk to them about the benefits vastly outweighing the risks.
Before we end this conversation, I just want to talk a little bit about what you think is going to happen to society after this. And Heidi, maybe you can speak to what's happened after pandemics of other sorts and how you think it's changed societies. Does it change societies, or is this something that's going to come and go and hopefully we can all forget about it?
I don't think this will be forgettable at all. I think there's going to be life before and after COVID, if we have an after COVID. I think this is up there with the 1918 H1N1. It's marking history. How it changes is that as a society, it's absolutely changing. I think people are rethinking the way they work, it's accelerated use of technology in different ways. I mean, I just I published a book called Stuck, and in the book I talk about the digital revolution and how we're going to get through this. We're kind of stuck because it's, but what's happened with COVID is because we're so dependent on it, it's made people who were a bit hesitant to go there, certainly in universities and other places, health authorities that were not normally using it for more than appointment reminders, are kind of forced to use it. So the transition I was talking about in my book that may take a while has actually been accelerated. Other things have taken a toll, and in a way, it's been dramatic and societally dramatic. So I think it will change us. I think we're yet to see how it'll change us.
Hey, Bill, talking about changing us, you've obviously been, you wrote about this, by the way, in one of your first books about what you thought the world was going to look like. And it's starting to come true, maybe not the way you had expected it to come, in terms of people moving out of big cities, going to other places. Do you think this is a long-term phenomena, that people are going to live in Zoom cities, that people aren't going to go to meetings in person? Or do you think that the second that people can get back on an airplane, and if you're a salesperson or in some kind of business where you have to go kiss the ring of this client, and if one person gets on the plane, the next salesperson is going to have to get on the plane, and that we're back to where we were pre-pandemic?
Well, my prediction would be that over 50% of business travel and over 30% of days in the office will go away. That now that it's not the gold standard that, yes, you flew all the way here to sit in front of me, that you can do the virtual connection, that it will be a very high threshold for actually doing that business trip, and that there will be ways that you can work from home a lot of the time. Some companies will be extreme on one end or the other. I just know, like talking to African leaders, I always feel bad for African leaders because there's so many conferences in Europe and the US they're expected to come to, and yet, their job in their country is so important, like their education or health system or, collecting taxes or just stability. And yet, they spend half their time on all these trips. The fact that now we can go in and do a 20-minute call if that's what's needed, touch base with them again. It's been pretty impressive how a lot has gotten done, including, I see Albert a lot because we do this pharma CEO roundtable, and that used to be, we'd fly to New York for that. We've done 5 of those this year, all virtually, to talk about how the industry is working together and doing communiques about how they see their role. We will go to the office somewhat. We'll do some business travel, but dramatically less.
Okay, different question. Have you made any either new friends or business friends remotely since this all began? I'll ask both of you. Bill?
Yeah, the fact that the software doesn't have any sort of serendipitous thing of people you run into after the meeting or gathering things, there's some work to be done there. And so my answer is no. I haven't I haven't run into somebody and made a new friendship. So yet there is something missing there.
Heidi, you made any new friends during the pandemic?
Well, I've definitely, with the kind of research I've been doing, which involves a lot of social listening and whatever, it hasn't so much been in a friend capacity, but I've met a lot of other researchers and a lot of other people trying to do innovative things. That's been great. I mean, people that I might not have looked for, but there's been more of an urgency to find other people trying to figure out this problem, right. and that's been quite that's been interesting.
Okay,
it's been more in that space.
Real quick before we wrap up, I don't know if you want to guess before we show you. I'll ask you to guess before we show you. We asked people on a scale of 1 to 5, meaning most would agree that they would take the vaccine within the first month. 1 to 5, 5 being they would absolutely do it, 1 being they absolutely wouldn't do it. Bill, we could play Prices Right in advance. Without going over, what do you think this audience wants to do?
3.8.
Ooh, what do you say, Heidi?
This would take it the first month?
They would take it in the first month.
50. No, I actually think less, probably 40.
40%.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're both very, 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 very close. Bill, I think, is going to be the winner. We'd have to do a little bit of math on Heidi's answer. Bill, you're good at numbers. 3.63. So,
Yeah, this is a fairly
Kind of between the two of us.
Yeah, this is a fairly elite audience, and so it'll be very interesting to look at a more broad number and what's going on there, which sadly I think the number would be lower.
Okay, fair enough. Bill, Heidi, I want to thank you for this conversation, for joining us. It's a special opportunity to spend time with both of you and to spend time with Albert. We thank you for the conversation. I want to thank everybody for joining us virtually. This is one grand experiment for all of us, and you guys have been sending in these fabulous questions, which hopefully I've been able to bring to everybody.